South Wales and Canberra.
Now we're talking.
I hope you're having a great night. It is Wednesday, the 4th of December. We are right across Sydney, Canberra and regional New South Wales. This is Evenings. Coming up, Fred Watson always joins us on a Wednesday. He has done for over 26 years on Evenings, but tonight he is in the crowd at Crowded House. So we've given him the night off. I think it's fair enough, don't you? But I'm delighted to let you know that astronomer Sarah Webb will be here. She's an astrophysicist at Swinburne University, and she's very happy to take your calls about space. You know the number, 1300 222 702. Of course, we will do the good news of the week with Natasha Hopman. But before we do that, are you sick and tired of dodgy, scam, potentially harmful texts bombarding your mobile phone? I've got to say I am. How many do you reckon you get a day? I'm going to put it out there and say I reckon I get 3 or 4 every day, particularly in the last few weeks or months. I feel like it's ramped up. There's lots of them, whether they're pretending to be the ATO, whether they're pretending to be e-toll or linked, whether they're pretending to be a bank, and also phone calls. Phone calls with the no caller ID on them. Sometimes you feel like they're overseas, and so naturally you just hang up. But we're kind of sick of it, aren't you? Some people fall for these scams. They click on a link and boom, they've got some of your details. Not your fault if you do that. I've almost been a victim more than once. The federal government, though, has finally announced action to stop this. It can't come soon enough, I reckon. To understand more about what's happening, what the federal government's response is, and when it will come into effect, and will it be enough to stop these scam texts once and for all, Katine Michael joins us. She's a cyber security expert and an associate professor at the University of Wollongong. Hello, Katine.
How are you?
Well, welcome back to Evenings. These new rules announced by the Albanese government this week essentially mean that the telecommunication company that provides the service to your mobile phone is responsible for blocking the texts from anyone who isn't a sender ID registered user. Is that right?
That's correct, Renee, although it's going to be a coordinated approach between telecommunications providers, banks and social media platforms all working together. So on the one hand, it will be up to the telecommunications companies to detect that fake text, that misleading text, that impersonation, duping, masquerading text coming to our phones. But it will be up to banks and social media platforms to send basically their ID to a sender ID register, and that's where approved numbers will be attached to certain brands, as you mentioned previously, and businesses, but it'll be a coordinated effort. The telecommunications company is working with the banks and social media platforms.
So with your expertise, Katine, will it work? Will it be effective to stop every scam text getting to you?
Look, I think, Renee, it'll decrease the frequency and impact of these SMS attempts. It'll disrupt the traditional business model of these scammers. It will require people to register approved numbers so that we know who they are, and there will be a commensurate effect for sure. Right now, we're seeing approximately just in 2024, $83 million worth of losses. And there have been about 9,000 scam complaints to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. So what we will see is the blocking of these misleading texts, these fake texts, and or a warning. And that'll depend on who's registered at what time and what period. But, you know, industry will be held accountable, but so will the telecommunications companies.
So what do you mean by a warning?
You might get the text coming to you with a warning label, or it may be blocked entirely. But what ACMA is saying is that they will develop an enforceable industry standard requiring telecommunications providers to check whether the messages being sent are part of legitimate brands or not. And what they're going to do is consult on that standard that will be developed. That's the Australian Communications Media Authority, ACMA. They have a task force that's called the Scam Telecommunications Action Task Force, and they will consult with industry, consult with other stakeholders that will be responsible for this system being enacted to establish the actual systems and processes required to operate this register, and provide a period of transition so that there's awareness in our community and people can respond. But increasingly, it will be about checking beneficiaries and their payer accounts, as we're already seeing some banks adopt this measure when we add a payee, especially when you're handing over big sums of money via a transfer in a bank account. You want to make sure that the details you have are actually real and you're not being duped. But even Meta has said that by early February next year, they're going to require advertisers seeking to have ads on their platform to verify the information through financial details and really crack down on fake messages and scam messages coming through Facebook and Instagram. So people are responding to the government's call. It is being called a first in the world sort of attempt. And Australia has that sort of landscape where, we don't have as many hundreds of millions of people in terms of population, and similarly, we don't have that many businesses commensurate to other nation states. So I think the government is on the right path, although it's going to be a coordinated effort to require this to work.
I might have overstated it saying I feel like I am bombarded with scam messages the whole time. If I look at my phone, now, it might not be 3 or 4 a day, which I think is what I said, but it feels like that. It feels like that the whole text service is filled up with all this rubbish kind of text messages to me. And why? Why in Australia? Are we more bombarded here than other countries in the world?
It's a good question, but SMS in Australia has become the most common form of scam delivery. And of course, scamsters continue to use mechanisms that are effective for them and bring them the highest yield. And so with the volume of messages we're all receiving on a variety of vector of platforms, SMS is just one. But then we have access to other SMS-style services, which are microblogging services, perhaps WhatsApp, or a whole range of services. And I think the volume that we're all receiving makes it harder for us to detect when and to differentiate between real texts like the ATO asking you to pay your quarterly pay-as-you-go sum versus a fake ATO. I know I always ask my accountant, is this real? And can you give me the details to the paying of my taxes? Because you need to verify. And I think so it's volume, it's the number of apps we're using. And a lot of people are basically saying, well, I give up. I'm actually not going to use SMS. And we need to restore the confidence and trust in this public SMS system, this short messaging system we've relied on for so many years. But so many people are going to private applications, whether that's Signal or other applications, to do their business because they're sick and tired of trying to differentiate between A or B. But we're still getting those one-stop codes coming to our SMS. Sometimes our passwords are reactivated or determined to be correct passwords only after we've put in a code via SMS. So it's becoming harder. We have the volume and also the types of messages being sent are so good. They're so believable. And that's the problem. And many people have literally stopped answering their phones if that phone number doesn't come up on the contact list with a descriptor, and they let it ring out. If nobody leaves a message, then they don't worry about it. And if they do leave a message, they respond accordingly. But that's most people's patterns today. Okay,
so this new sender ID register, the SMS sender ID register, the legislation has gone through this week, but the government says it won't be established until late next year, late 2025. Why does it take an entire year to get this register up and working?
Yes, it does take a long time. I think initially the consultation process needs to take place end to end. We can't just rush into designing a system and dictate to industry what their requirements will be without consulting them. I think government has learnt from previous implementations of national-wide mandates that you need to consult and co-design using a collaborative approach. And if they're touting a coordinated approach among industry and government, then they need to be actually fulfilling that. And so we hear that the register will take about $10 million to actually launch. That's funding for 4 years from last year's to this year's budget that was approved. And then there's the awareness raising, because the brands that belong to companies need to buy into this after the consultation period and have time to actually register. So it won't be automatic. It will be up to industry to submit onto this register and to be recognised, and then a process by which, okay, well, if numbers change or they're adding numbers for particular goods and services, these also need to be registered with time, but perhaps there'll be some kind of automatic process down the track. But yeah, it does take time to educate the population, consult with them, and then have people voluntarily submit their details. Otherwise, they will be held accountable. And what we're seeing now, particularly banks, is an external dispute resolution option, whereby if somebody has been a victim of a scam and it isn't their fault, there is some kind of compensation. That's what the government is saying right now, that victims will be compensated. As we know from earlier in the year, that legislative change will see an oversight body, and the bank won't have to give back the money directly, but there will be an oversight body that will investigate matters further. But, having 9,000 complaints this year alone of scams to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority warrants a process being instituted. We've got to try something. They have been piloting with the NAB, Commonwealth Bank and the ATO, and they will be looking at this as an important tool to protect Australians from highly organised scammers.
Okay, that's protecting us from scam texts. So they're going to block those scam texts because they're not on the new SMS ID register. What about the scam phone calls? On the text line, Greg says, I don't answer my mobile phone anymore if I don't recognise a number. I'm getting to the stage that I tell people, please just text me now. And so I hardly ever talk on the phone. That's not a good outcome. We're too scared to even answer the phone if it's an unknown number to talk to someone because there's so many of these scam phone calls. How can we stop them?
It's a very interesting question. If they can stop the SMSs, can they stop and prevent calls from overseas, for example, calls coming through IP-based telephony? It's not like the old circuit switch voice networks, which pretty much a whole circuit was tied up for a sender to send a message or call somebody. Today we're using VoIP, voice over IP, over our internet protocol, and that allows for different methods to be used to go undetected. So with text, there's content. With somebody calling, there's no real content because no one has spoken. There's nothing to read yet. We don't know who's on the other side. And we're seeing these sophisticated rackets, of course, via the internet protocol network, establish telephony between 2 points and then just literally tear it down after a hack or after a victim has paid over $100,000 innocently or something of that nature. But it's becoming so sophisticated that these virtual capabilities are also now being linked to physical locations. So even if someone rings up to find out that number that was just, calling me from overseas, it looks like a international number. I do call that nation maybe. Let me check if they're legitimate. Let me check if they're Amazon. Let me check. And we have to remember it's not when people call us, we can't really verify their identity as such, even if the number looks legitimate, because these scammers are using legitimate networks and legitimate ways to contact. We should always be calling the brand to double check, and that's an overhead for us. But as you say, Renee, the more we lose confidence in these public goods and public infrastructure, the worse it is for society. And how can we reestablish this confidence in these capabilities that we have in the modern world through the digital economy?
Katina, Michael, it's a big issue. We'll have to keep finding ways, because the result can't be that you can't answer your phone because you're too scared who's on the other end, and therefore you don't ever talk to anybody via the phone network, that creates enormous social isolation and loneliness, and that's not good for
It
community.
does.
Thank you for your time.
I think, Renee, people will be, as we're finding in the literature, they're more hoping to talk to machines these days via chat rather than people. But I would like to echo Stephen Jones's comments that this is not only good for social policy, but it's actually economic policy too, with benefits. So thank you for your time, Renee.
Yeah, good on you. Katina Michael is a cyber security expert. She's an associate professor at the University of Wollongong and also at the Arizona University. She's in the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence. I'm Renee Crosh. This is Evenings. Tony says, I agree the government must do more to stop billions of dollars going to scammers every year from Australians. I'm also getting more and more SMS text scams, scam emails. Every time I receive one, I block the numbers. Each day, I also have to block the countless scam emails that I receive, and I'm particularly weary as I was recently caught out responding to a scam message and lost several $100s. I'm so sorry to hear that, Tony. It's it's not acceptable, is it? Someone here says the ATO withholds their number when calling you. Yeah, you've got to be careful because the ATO, they do use text messaging to contact you, and the scammers are also pretending to be the ATO and using SMS text messaging to contact you. So hopefully by late 2025, this new SMS ID register will at least go in some part to weeding out some of those scam texts to our mobile phones. The good news coming up for you next. Natasha Hopman has been looking around, searching to find the best stories. She'll be here.